you cannot see the forest for the trees. It's an old proverb that basically says you can't see something for what it is while you're in the middle of it. So while you're in the middle of a tornado, it's going to be tough to call it a tornado. When we grow up in certain patterns of social or emotional warfare, it's tough to kind of see it as warfare because it's just a normal thing. Right when we start, we got a train going by. And when we are in the middle of something, or in the middle of a jungle or whatever it may be, it could be anything. It could be forms of stratification in the community. You're not going to be able to call it what it is properly because proportionate to anything outside of it, you are just in it. And that is just part of your life. So if you are raised in a household where there is yelling, where there is blame, where there is judgment, where there is maybe verbal abuse, and that's the day-to-day, it's gonna be hard to see outside of it because, well, that was just the baseline for you. I'm trying to stay away from the word normal right now. And when that's the baseline, you see kind of the world as that in a sense. And so what we're going to get into now is a series of videos on clarity. And you finding clarity is probably one of the most important things that you can do in your life because it is a tool that is going to help you revisit it all the time and revisit it to basically see things for what they are. And that line is tricky. I heard this so long ago, my goodness. We don't see things for what they are. We see things for what we are. And again, you can't see the forest for the trees. When we see things for what we are, we're reacting to everything as, well, we would see them, as it applies to us, not anybody else, as it applies to us. And when you start to take a step back and really engage with non-duality and say, okay, what is my human experience on this? What is going on here with everything that's happening right now? Because when we open up our phones and we look at the weather app, we say, oh, it's gonna be, this temperature outside. Everybody has a different reaction to it. 8 billion people, 8 billion different worlds. And so your world, you have to understand, is different than other people's. And we went over this in the past videos where we said somebody comes in and they pop off and they just get really angry at the drop of a hat, and everybody says, oh my goodness, I can't believe that person, just went from 0 to 60. Well, they were on 58. In their world, they were heated. Or in their world, you wake up on 58, whatever it is. The whole point being is that they are in their own baseline. You are in your own baseline. Once you're able to start addressing yours, then you can find clarity going forward. And we're gonna give you 3 steps to taking accountability, because to get clarity, you have to take accountability. And this may be one of the toughest things that you do, because taking accountability, sometimes we equate or we make synonymous with shame, guilt, less than, self-devaluing, low self-esteem, condemnation, deep personal judgment. When in reality, accountability is doing the thing that is going to hem up whatever happened that you don't want to happen again, and so you can go forward making the correction in your life. It's you stepped out of the lane that the journey that you were on, whoops, and now you can go forward. If you don't take accountability, then you essentially create a world, or you create a lane where now you're veering totally off the path and you're telling yourself that you're on the right one. And by taking no accountability, you're asking everybody else in your life to be complicit with you in this direction that you're going that is entirely inauthentic to you. And so for this series about clarity, the first thing we have to get down to is accountability. And of course we have 3 things for you, and we have a story. And the 3 things we'll very quickly go over, and we're going to go over some terms that I think will be very important for you to understand. But the first 3 steps to taking accountability, to taking personal accountability, are: where were you the common denominator in all of these situations? What is the source of your lack of clarity or accountability? And lastly, you guessed it, you knew what it was: ownership. So when we talk about taking accountability, it doesn't mean you shouting to the world, I'm wrong. It doesn't mean you have to profess your undying Shakespearean heightened text apology to somebody. It doesn't mean that you have to double over and embarrass yourself to make, amends or make it right. When you take accountability, it starts with you. And I want people to understand, I want you to understand that it doesn't have to be public just yet, the accountability, if you did something. And a lot of times, most times, this isn't even a public thing. It's just between you and you. You did or said something that was out of pocket. You did something that was outside of your character and who you're trying to be. Or we can go on a larger scale. You're living a life that you never wanted. You're being a way that is entirely inauthentic to the person that you want to be. You are on a journey that you never wanted to start on. These are tougher things to take accountability of, and they've definitely happened to me. I can tell you stories about them down the line, but assess where you're at with that. How deep are we down the hole or on the scale here with lack of accountability, or taking accountability, I should say. And when you start to look around and essentially take inventory of what you have not been accountable for, and you've just let slip, slide, and just happen, like tacitly just go along with it, where has that gotten you? And how does that feel? Like really just delve into like the feeling, like how does that feel? And a lot of times we'll have reactions. We'll be angry, we'll be upset, or we'll blame somebody, we'll project. And there's a lot of situations that are undesirable. And this is now the time for you to take a look at those undesirable situations and see where you are the common denominator. Really take a look at that. That is a tough mirror to peer into. For me, I could see where I was the common denominator, and immediately there was this very quick knee-jerk reaction. I can't explain it. Just to be, oh, no, we can't talk about Fight Club. We can't do that. And it was so fast, and it was so. The best word for it was elusive, because it would just, and I would just be like, yeah, no, I can't deal with that right now. I can't think about that. And it wasn't until I gave myself permission to think about it, or at least catch it by the tail, be like, whoa, don't you get away. And dealing with where I was the common denominator in a lot of situations helped me so much, because I could see all of these patterns. I could see this pattern. And I really don't want these outcomes anymore. I do not want A plus B equals this anymore. I don't like this whole algorithm. This is not me. I don't like this at all. So what I had to do, the first step, this isn't changing anything. This isn't taking action. This isn't seeking feedback. I had to look at myself as the common denominator. What situations have you been the common denominator in? This is extremely important. This is simple math, but it is tough to look at. Very tough to look at. And once you start to look at that and just notice it, I'm not asking you to write it down. I'm not asking you to even define what it is. Just look at the moments where you were the common denominator. That will start to tell you the story that is going on. That'll drive you then back to the source. So this is step 2. Find the source. Let's see if I can find it here. What is the source of your lack of clarity or accountability? When you can find the source of, or go back to where you started this, or where this pattern began, or where not taking accountability was kind of a cool thing, or you felt the rewards of it, which were only short-term rewards and long-term costs, is that when you find it, you can start to figure out who was that version of yourself. Who was the version of yourself that felt this was going to be a long-term payoff? Wow, I was really going to get away with some stuff here. Actually, I was going to build a life on this inauthenticity. Yeah, man, it was going to be great. And once you can kind of consult or even just connect with that version of yourself with no judgment, just, okay, this is where this came from. I get it now. Oh, then you can start to understand where you're at right now. Now, we're stepping out of the forest, right? Can't see the forest for the trees. We're stepping away from the trees. And so once you start to look at the source of your lack of accountability or your lack of clarity, This could be a story you began telling yourself as a child. This could be something that you figured was a way of being in college or in your 20s or in your teens. This could be a rift of trauma that you keep looping and enacting and enacting and enacting. This could be a story that somebody told you and you were like, yeah, that actually makes sense. I'm gonna adopt that for the rest of my life. Unbeknownst to you, but you just took it up. I remember somebody told me, never do abs workouts 2 days in a row. That echoed in my brain for about, oh goodness. It echoed in my brain for about a decade or so. And I was just like, yeah, I don't do abs 2 days in a row because it just destroys your stomach. And then lo and behold, looked it up and it's like, no, that's not true at all. That's not true at all. That is, it might be somewhat of a setback maybe, but it's not true. No, it isn't. But I picked up that story and I ran with it for over a decade because I was just like, oh no, that's the truth, right? Yeah, that's the truth. No, it's really not. Essentially, source where you have been taking up a pattern practice of lack of accountability and not having clarity, and then you want to see where you're the common denominator. Well, before all that, see where you are the common denominator. And lastly, take ownership. And when I say take ownership, I don't mean blame yourself. I don't mean point at yourself in the mirror and say how bad of a person you are, which would be condemnation. I don't mean to brand yourself as this person. When you see somebody make a play that when you see somebody make a move in football or in any sport and it goes wrong and they come back to the huddle and they just say, it's me. They then move on. It's like, no, that's me. So sorry, that was totally on me. Yep, got it. Now, the next thing that I'll tell you to beware of is that when you're in situations where you take accountability, but you have somebody consistently bringing up the story and wielding it against you, that's a problem. That's a huge problem. And we want to be in environments where we can take ownership and then that environment is going to support us going forward. That is where really, really, really great and cool things can happen, is when you're in an environment where everybody is upholding your greatest interests, and because you are upholding your greatest interests, you enter into this environment. I don't think you can come into a positive environment until you're being positive about yourself. And it's tough to be in a positive environment if you're not positive about yourself. You'll see it as negative. But that aside, the idea is that when you are able to take ownership in an environment or in a family or in a relationship or whatever it may be, you are then able to build from it. Because then all of you or the two of you can look back and say, oh, or just you can look back and say, oh man, that back there, I remember that. Yeah, went like right off to the side and then got back on track. We learned. Yeah, fool me once. Oh, man, here we are. So happy that's behind us. And now we're moving forward. Taking ownership is a building block to going to the place that you're expanding towards or growing towards. So when you have a goal and you take ownership of a mistake, or you take ownership of going off track or just stepping outside of your authenticity, you can then move forward and give yourself grace. Okay? You can't have clarity without giving yourself grace. It just they can't like exist in the same room. So when you take ownership, when you take accountability, not of only just what you did, but who you were being at the time, you can then direct yourself towards being the person that you want to be anyways. Be, do, have. So now, when we take accountability, we can also develop a pattern practice of taking accountability where it is not this giant boulder or this scary thing or this elusive thing, as we illustrated earlier, where we're not even engaging in shadow work. We're just in the shadow. We're just saying, oh God, I can't talk about that. I gotta go. And you see people loop in this all the time. You see people loop in negative phrasing all the time. I can't afford that. They're all dogs. They'd never, like me. I guess I'm not tall enough. Oh man, I can never fit in with that crowd. They are continually putting out affirmations that tell themselves the story of why they can't. And they then live in the space outside of the source. And they're in the forest. They're in the forest. And they never step outside of it to see what they've been telling themselves, to properly assess it. And if somebody steps outside the forest and look at it and they're like, yeah, I still want to stick with this. Okay, go ahead. All right, that ain't no problem. Just keep going forward with that. But the thing is that you cannot have transmutation until you have awareness. So when you step outside of the situation, you can then start to take accountability for it if you choose to do so. This video is not to tell you to take accountability. It's telling you what happens when you do take accountability. So I want you to understand, when you take accountability, you are able to see the big picture and move forward and start to build on that picture. One giant example of this was, and I've already told this story before, but it is so tightly knit to this subject. It was when I was 18 and I told my father I never wanted to speak to him again. I was going through Lyme's disease. I had nothing but disdain and really just spiteful feelings for him, because my life wasn't going the way it wanted to go. So I figured to make him the villain in it, so therefore I could have somebody to blame. And I'm quickly going through this, but we'll break this all down bit by bit in another video. And I went to where he lives across the country, and we'd kind of forgotten about that letter that I sent him where I told him I didn't want to talk to him anymore. And I remembered it when I was in the middle of his office, and I said, "Ooh, hey man, it's been about 8 months since I told you I'd never wanted to see you again, but sorry about that." And then while he was in his study, he just did this, did this thing where he was like, he didn't even look that close to me. He was like, "Someday you'll understand." And then he went back to his thing, and I was just like, okay. And it wasn't until, that was 2001. God, it wasn't until probably 19, 20 years later until I understood what he was saying. That gets me so emotional, because he gave that to me. Like he had the not only the generosity, but he gave that to me. He didn't judge me. He didn't say anything. He didn't say, "Yeah, that thing you said was really, messed up, and I can't believe you said that. No son of mine would ever say that." He just said, "Someday you'll understand." And I smiled, and I was like, whatever. But my memory works in this weird way. I was talking about this to somebody earlier, that I pull like very, very small, pieces of information and details. Can barely put names with faces of people I just met, but like the mood, or a clip that somebody had on their blazer or whatever, I can tell you what it was. But that moment, I can tell you exactly where he was sitting, exactly where I was sitting, the time of day, the way the lighting was. But he gave that to me, and it was just a gift that took about 20 years to unwrap, 20 years for me to unwrap. And that was beautiful, because it was saying, like, down the road you'll get it in one way or another. And I have another story that's going to basically kind of help you understand not seeing the forest for the trees and understanding other people that are in it. But to go back to my father as I try to wrap this up, the idea is that he's like, I appreciate you taking accountability for that devastating letter, and I really hope down the road you'll be able to see where you're the common denominator in some of this, and take accountability and inventory for your own life, and start to build from it and make it better and make it awesome, make it some really cool stuff that you're proud of. Because at that point, I had done a lot of cool stuff, but I was not proud of anything, and the lack of pride, morphed very quickly to shame because of just being lost as an 18-year-old and graduating high school. But that's for another time. But he was pulling me out of the forest pulling me out of the forest for a quick second to be like, "Hey, look at all this. You'll understand someday." And then right back as we go. To get you to understand where you're at, it's tough to see where you're at because you're in it. You have to get out of it. You have to take a step out of it and then look at it and understand what it is. And when we see other people, non-duality, in the same thing, you have to understand that some people are in it, they're not seeing outside of it. So giving other people grace where they haven't taken accountability is also a major ability as well. There was a bear that attacked a bunch of campers in Yellowstone Park, and it was on a roll. It's this mama bear that was just taking people out. And nobody understood why she was doing this. I think it was back in the 70s, 60s. And they finally found the bear. They had, executed the bear. And when they were running an autopsy or like an assessment of the bear, they found that there was a shard of glass in the gums of the bear. Now, when a bear feels attacked, it's going to lash out at other things. And this particular bear, felt like it was eternally being attacked. It was all the time being attacked. So it had to defend its cubs, even though, it was just traveling with the cubs, but it was feeling this pain in its jaw. And they never knew. That's why it was doing that. That bear was caught in a state of bellicose, which is a state of preparation for warfare, which a lot of people can be in. And that shard of glass is essentially an analogy that could be framed to somebody's trauma, or somebody having it out a certain way as a child and then believing that's the only way it can be. And so then they're caught in this perpetual state of warfare, or being prepared for warfare, being prepared for the worst. And maybe you are as well. And until we step out of that, we can't really understand why these patterns keep happening. Why did this relationship go down the way it did? Why does this keep happening this way? I don't understand. Oh, let me step aside. And that is not easy. That's done through therapy. That's done through all the video section about healing. It's to step out of the pattern and be able to look at it for what it is. We don't see things for what they are. We see things for what we are. Until we step out, then we can take a look at it. And many times people will say, time will tell. Time will tell. And it will, but not all the time. Because many times people have served entire lifetimes. I say served lifetimes, not that they're in prison, but they serve a lifetime to a story. They serve to it. It's not theirs. They don't have autonomy or agency outside of it. They are serving that story. And they're not moving outside of it. This is your opportunity to step outside of your story and take a look at everything. This is Christmas Carol. Essentially what they do throughout the whole movie. Ghost of Christmas Past, present, future. He's stepping outside of everything and looking at the what was, what is, and what could be. And that's what you're doing. You're looking at the what is right now. Take a little bit of Ghost of Christmas Past. You're taking a look at the past as well. Yeah. And in doing that, you're going to find where you're the common denominator. You're going to find the source of where this is all happening. And then you're going to take ownership. And ownership may sound like the toughest thing to do, but once you look at those first two things, just like that. And you got to make it into a practice. You have to. We're going to get going on more of this. I think this might be a 7 or 8 video series. Every time I say, oh, yes, this will be a 5 video series, it ends up being 6, 7. So I don't know how many videos this will be, but we'll find out when it all happens. But this is on clarity. And I hope that you're able to do some research of your own on finding clarity. And if you have a particular way that you have found clarity, or basically been able to utilize some tools to get clarity in situations, put them in the comments below. Many other people would love to hear about this, on how to get clarity in their own lives. How did it work out for you? So maybe I can possibly exercise it in my own life and see what happens. All right, that's all we got for you today. We'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for tuning in.